Hi, I'm Kimmy Hadzima, founder of Lumerize, a nonprofit that is dedicated to creating safe and welcoming spaces for storytelling, healing, and transformation. At Lumerize, we believe everyone is seen, worthy, welcome, and loved. Hello, everyone. Today, we're diving into a topic of codependency from a therapist perspective. This is the second part of our two-part video series on codependency. Today, we are joined by R. Kenward Jones, a counselor, writer, podcaster, husband, father, and grandfather. He grew up in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, served as a naval officer and intelligence specialist, and later spent 20 years in ministry. With master's degrees in biblical studies and human services counseling, he now serves as a full-time counselor in southeastern Virginia, drawing on a lifetime of diverse experiences to help others on their journey. So welcome, R. Kenward Jones, to Lumerize. Would you care
Glad
to?
to be here.
Excellent, thank you so much. And would you care to tell the audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, let's start with this. Let's go with Ron. I use R. Kenward Jones because I have my own form of PTSD. There's too many Ron Joneses around, and so Kenward's my middle name. And when I started to have my novels published, I wanted to break them out and have some way of distinguishing from all the other Ron Joneses out there. So that's where that comes from. That's kind of my pen name, R. Kenward Jones, but my name is Ron, and uh, or anything else that people call me. So, but that's what I go by. Yeah, what I would say my primary identity, while all those things are true, my primary identity that I function out of would be I'm a disruptive teacher. I disrupt and I teach. And that's what I feel most comfortable identifying myself as a therapist, yeah, as all those things you named. Inside of all those, I'm a disruptive teacher. So,
Thank you for that. All right, so, we're talking about codependency and, just a quick little background on myself. I've suffered from that for quite a long time, struggled with it. I've led a pretty intense life in regard to, childhood abuse and self-perpetuating abuse. So codependency was pretty much ingrained in me from very early. So I just want to dive into a few questions with you. We're going to cover this in two different ways. The first thing we're going to cover is the secular side, just kind of give an idea of, what it means just to be in therapy. And then I want to dive into more of a Christ-centered, focus on it. So the first question, from a clinical standpoint, how do you define codependency, and what are some of the common traits or patterns that you see in clients?
I'm not a classical therapist in the sense of doing diagnosis, but I can give you my understanding of codependency. Um, it, it basically comes down to a a pretty radical belief that and look, let me back up. I think all people to a certain degree grow up and begin growing up codependently. I mean, you're growing up dependent upon somebody in your life for sustenance. You're dependent upon them for finding out your initial idea of who you are, as well as your physical environment. So in a lot of ways, um, codependency is something that you start out with, and then most people they will grow out of it as they mature and grow into intradependency, where there's more of a give and take. Um, I think where codependency becomes a clinical problem is where you need to have the other person's particular approval. You need to have their opinion. You need them to be happy with you. These things are all where that growing up form of that does not change into interdependence, where you feel like you have agency. I think the main part of it is that the codependent person gives up agency over their own life and then gives it to another person. Like this person is now allowed to tell you who you are, whether you're doing okay, um, and basically define your life. That's where it becomes a real problem because you're not, no human being was designed to be some other person's object of any sort. So that's where I think the where you would call clinical codependency is where you find someone who's given up agency to another person. Their well-being is in the hands of another person, which is obviously very dangerous because there's no guarantee that that person is going to be a nice person, a good person, a person who has your best interest at heart, right? So I think a way to break it down that I've always thought of it is um, in where you'll run into it in like recovery programs will normally be along the lines of like an Al-Anon, right? Al-Anon is for those people who are dependent upon people who are dependent upon alcohol, right? And so you actually almost have that person is your drug. They have to be okay with you. They have to be okay for you to be okay. Kind of like an alcoholic has to have a drink to be okay with themselves. You have to have the person in order to feel good about yourself. And yeah, as I think I'm sure you understand, um, that becomes very pathologic. You can't thrive. You don't live well as a human being like that because you were made for, well, you were made for interdependence and you were made for your own particular identity that you can't just get out of someone else. So I guess classically speaking, I mean, this is a very long answer. Classically speaking, where codependence entered the lexicon of therapy was probably in the person who was addicted to the addict. That's where it became like we started to understand it. Like this is what this is. Um, but since then, we've developed more ideas about what we would call people pleasers and this particular kind of personality that has to have then that's codependency like metastasized, right? That's like it goes out from instead of one person, it's everybody. So now you become, it's like the cancer of codependency metastasizes, and now you've got to make everybody around you happy, which is really, really, really pathologic and dangerous.
Difficult. I've lived that life, so I completely understand. And
Right.
you're constantly on eggshells because making everyone happy is just the hardest thing you could possibly try to do. Um, so it's kind of funny because you've already answered several questions just with that one. So I appreciate that. We knocked a few out. So here's a good one. How did childhood experiences with parents or caregivers shape codependent behaviors later in life?
Um, Great. That's a great question. So everybody has a family of origin. Um, and I want to be clear about this. This is something I always like clarify with any client, any person that I'm seeing. There's a huge difference between blame and accountability. Like we're allowed to talk about our families of origin and not make them the objects of our blame. Like we blame them, right? That's not the point. Like any therapist who lands all of your problems in the lap of a family member or somebody like that and says, well, that's your problem, is not really helping you. Because blame, you can get all the blame placed and it doesn't do anything for you. You can take all the blame in the world in 25 cents and still not get a good cup of coffee. I mean, but accountability is let's say what actually happened. So when we talk about childhood experiences, let's make sure that we differentiate. We're talking about taking accountability, how your family of origin actually operated. And as I said, um, particular families of origin have I don't know, stickiness. Like you have to, in order to raise a child, they have to depend upon you. But there's a particular kind of personality that even has children. This is really strange. Like a person who has a child in order to have somebody who needs them. Like we all know people like this. They feel very unfulfilled. Maybe their marriage isn't going so well. Maybe their family of origin wasn't so great. So they have a child, and I've heard people say this. So I would have somebody to love me and depend upon me, so I can feel some kind of way about me. Now, if that's the way your family of origin was, and I kind of put that off on like a woman, but it's not, this is not a male female thing. It's a person thing because men do the same thing. Um, you by very nature, the atmosphere of your house was set up. You were breathing codependency, and you didn't even know it. Like that was like they were teaching you. Yes, you need to depend upon me. And when that happens, like the way that the neuroscience works is your prefrontal cortex, which is your executive decision making part of your brain, isn't fully formed until you're like, I think 21, 22, 23 years old, which explains a lot about why we did the things we did when we were teenagers, right? Like, because our executive decision making wasn't formed yet, right? So um, while this mind of mush is still forming and you're learning how to make decisions, there are things that are getting imprinted on you that make sense to you because of your family of origin. And if you're told you have to need me, you have to listen to me, not just obey me, you have to listen to me, but you have to make me feel okay. Well, you learned how to be codependent before you're barely out of your crib. Um, I think this is one of those things that gets generationally passed down, like a lot of cases that like you learned it from your mother and your mother learned it from her father and it comes down to you like that and you just learned it and no one really ever questioned it, right? Until the system conks because sooner or later codependency breaks down. It just breaks down because, like you said, you'll be exhausted trying to keep
Absolutely.
people happy, right?
Oh, I've been exhausted most of my life. This is the most free I've ever been.
Well, amen. There you go.
Yes, because it is, I mean, codependency is like a prison. You know, you get stuck and it even breaks your picker for other people because you don't know how to pick your close friends or how to pick a partner because you're basing everything off of that codependent need. And so,
Mm.
I mean, almost every single relationship I've been in, not all of them, but a large majority of them were narcissistic people. And it seemed to me that I attracted those sorts of people based on my codependency and probably a lot of other things too, but that's a pretty big one for me. So
Well, sure, you can see, I'm sure you've heard it before, and your folks have heard this before, that how people have magnetizing traumas, that they meet and they stick together. That one that you just described is like that's classic. Okay, so a narcissist believes that the entire world revolves around the end of their nose, and therefore everyone should desire to make them feel good. Whereas the codependent person lives in a world where they are looking for someone to do that to, and make someone to make happy. In other words, they're looking to be objectified. And this works out in all kinds of ways. I mean, sexually speaking, it means that a lot of young girls who have a codependency trait or trauma end up with narcissistic men because they're just going to objectify them and turn them into what? They'll turn them into a sex object and they'll let themselves be objectified because they think that's the way the world works. And it's very, very, very destructive because we all know, like, what happens when you, what happens when you're not able to sexually perform, or you're not as pretty as you used to be. Well, the narcissist just goes because they'll go find, they'll go find something else, or they'll keep you and add another one because that's the way the narcissists work. Why would that be a problem? Everybody in the world is just trying to meet my needs, right? So very destructive.
I agree with you there. Definitely destruction. Yeah. So moving on, you pretty much covered a lot of the, different parts of codependency, even in adulthood. So, for example, masks and coping. So, in my a previous video that I just did, I described therapy, just plain therapy, as like swapping out masks. So I
Mm,
swapped out one coping mechanism for something that's maybe healthier and better for me, but it's still a mask. So,
mm,
how do you see masks or coping mechanisms show up in codependent clients?
mm. Well, I mean, in a manner of speaking, codependency is a mask. I mean, it's a way of coping with who you think you are. In the sense that we just described, before you got a chance to really explore identity, you were turned into a kind of a servant that exists to serve other people. And the problem there is like that mask doesn't feel like a mask. That feels like what you ought to do. And especially depending on how coercive your family of origin was, and insistent upon it, like that's how embedded it gets in you, right? So you do wear that mask. I like that actually. That's a good way of putting it. But you don't know that it's a mask. You don't know it, because, like I said, you've been wearing it your whole life. I also use the phrase that you're reading a script. Like you never auditioned for the part. Someone just handed it to you, said, "No, this is who you are. Read this," and you just keep reading it. And that generally doesn't. You don't come up against a problem until it either threatens your life in some way because these are very destructive behaviors, or it threatens your mental health because you end up being very depressed and you don't know why, or very anxious and depressed, bouncing around bipolar. There's a lot of dysfunction that comes to this. And then there's an opportunity to say, oh, why is this happening to me? And then the mask slips a little bit, and which is kind of terrifying because you don't know who you are without the mask, right? You're like, well, if I take this off, is there going to be anything behind it? You know? And so to take that off feels terrifying. And a lot of people will put on another mask. They'll mask their codependency with alcohol or sex or drugs, or sex, drugs, rock and roll. It's always the same thing, same things. Um, or you'll just take one codependent relationship and swap it out for a next,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then your mask actually does, well, mine would always change because I built my persona based upon the person I was with. So I always gave up everything from myself and turned into the person that that person was expecting me to be. So that objectifying part.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. And the terrifying thing about it is that feels, even people who love you, who can say, "Hey, do you know that you're doing that?" Um, it the people who love you the most can't even tell you a lot of times. I mean, they're like, "Do you know what you're doing?" And because it feels so normal, you don't really, and someone standing outside the system can usually see it better than you, which is one of the values of therapy to me, right? It's like, I don't have a dog in this race. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to objectify you. I'm not trying to, you know, all I am is standing outside the system and I'm saying, "Hey, I don't think this is working for you. Like let's take a look at this, can we?"
Mhm.
Which is that's a great privilege of therapy, counseling, working with people when they'll let you see their masks, or they'll ask you, can you see my mask? That's a great, like, when people invite you into that, that's a pretty big deal.
Yes, I had that experience with my therapist numerous times, and it was funny because she told me to read Codependent No More probably 15 years ago, and I actually bought the book, and I never read it. It sat on my shelf. I wasn't ready to
Yeah.
accept that label or that mask. But I did come to a point where I realized I am literally becoming all these different people for all these different people. And realized that I knew I was a chameleon. I'd been told I was a chameleon, but I took that as a compliment. I didn't realize that it was really my multitudes of masks that I just switched out. No matter where I was, I had a mask for that situation. And that's really a sad place to have to live for a long time because you're I did not know who I was. I had no idea who I was. I was everyone
Mm.
else's. I was never me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that brings up a really good question too, in regards to boundary setting, because that seems to be extremely difficult for codependents. So, what are some of the practical steps that you can recommend for any kind of codependent to start setting healthy boundaries?
Uh, Interesting. A couple things come to mind. Number one, you look in the mirror and say this. You just go, no. And and do that and do that a few times until it doesn't feel so bad. You know, it's like say no. And when once you can say that in private a little bit more, then you can start like trying to exercise it, you know, in public. It's funny that you say the book because somebody handed me a book at least 30 years ago called Boundaries by Henry Cloud. And yeah, I was like, okay, like, people are always handing me books. I'm like, yeah, 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 I'll read that. And I never read it. And when I was in the, yeah, you got it. Yeah, right. It's a really good book, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It's a great book.
Yeah, so but I didn't read it. I guess I didn't read it until I was in the middle of a very long dark depression that lasted about 13 years. Um, and I didn't read it while I was in the depression because of that. I think I don't really remember um, what got me to it, but when I started to read it, I realized like everybody has boundary problems. Everybody has boundary issues. I think starting from family of origin, again, you're starting out in complete dependency and hopefully growing into intradependency and not getting caught in codependency, which is kind of like an arresting of the, you know, development. So therefore, everyone has boundary issues because when you start as an infant, you have no boundaries. You can't have a boundary. You have no way of protecting yourself or keeping someone from picking you up and physically moving you or doing whatever. Then as you start to establish, you know, personhood, you start to realize that there are boundaries. And in a very codependent atmosphere, you're not allowed to have boundaries. Like in these situations, another one that you could experience, like you weren't allowed to have a be behind a closed door. You know, your parents never let you close your door. Then there was never any locks. You know, you couldn't even go to the bathroom without somebody walking in on you. Well, you found out that your boundaries were not respected.
Mhm.
And then you found out that your boundaries were actually bad. You know, this is bad for you to don't have boundaries. It's like I said, it's pathologic. It's not healthy. Um, so the the practical thing is to find someone who you trust, which is hard, but I believe you find someone who you can trust and then you practice saying no. Like you actually tell them, like you can do this. You can do this with a therapist, or you can do it with a close friend. It doesn't really matter. You say, "Look, I'm having a problem saying no. I, can you just help me? Like I want to say no more." And will you just be my friend and help me? Like I'm going to say no sometimes and you're not going to understand. And I'm practicing and I need a safe place to do that. You don't know how to, really. The genuinely codependent person does not know how to say no.
No, we do not. It's interesting because when I was married, my mother-in-law gave me a book called How to Say No.
Right.
And I think the main title of it is When You Do Too Much.
Hmm.
And yeah, I struggled with that for many years to say no. And it takes a very, very long time for that to actually become comfortable, especially if you've spent 25, 30 years being a yes person. It is extremely uncomfortable. And one of the things that I've started doing recently is I write things on my bathroom mirror that I need to say to myself every day.
Hmm.
And that's one of those. A big, huge no is up there with an exclamation point on it. And every time I clean my window, that one goes back up
Yeah.
through my mirror.
Yeah, look, it's a very important word. It's
Hmm.
a very important word and you can it gets all twisted up. It gets all twisted up. Another thing I'm thinking about too is Kim, like being this kind of personality that doesn't say no is very useful to certain vocations, and or actually not for you, but for your boss because your boss will do this when they realize you don't have any boundaries. You'll be the one who's like, okay, well, I need somebody to stay after on Friday. I need somebody to finish this project. I need, and so they will abuse this kind of person. I was in the Navy, and I recognize this kind of personality in some of my troops. I wasn't trying to take advantage of it. And a lot of times, here's the weird thing the truly codependent person and the people pleasing kind of blended personality, it's not they don't feel abused, therefore they jump in and do things even they abuse themselves really. They are willing to do more than they should do and kind of get in a position where it eventually becomes expected. Oh yeah, Kim's going to do it, which perpetuates the broken system.
Yes. I've had that situation for 13 years where I had a boss who took advantage of me. By the time I left that position, I was doing the jobs of three different people.
Yeah.
And I was performing. I didn't have a problem doing it, but it was interesting when, uh-oh, apparently this is going to end in 10 minutes. Hang on.
Okay.
All right. So we'll have to do this quickly.
Okay.
All right. So let's see. Let's go ahead and jump into the next question. Well, since we have 10 minutes, let's jump over to the Christian perspective because I don't want to leave this out.
Okay.
Um, I'm going to do two different ones at once. So we'll talk about higher power and then celebrate recovery. Um, and while I was going through the steps, I realized that I had made all these other people my higher power. And so from a Christian counseling perspective, does that shift in the higher power back to God? Is that how does that change the healing process? And then in regard to celebrate recovery, let's see. How does that help address the soul level aspects of codependency?
Well, a lot of great stuff. I think it's actually pretty simple and doesn't take all that much time. And here's the thing. Um, when the real problem with codependency is an identity issue. It's like you don't know who you are. So you have literally made an identity out of these different people and how they feel about you. And since those people are just people, that's a moving target. Like how I mean, classic husband-wife situation is if I define myself as Tina's husband and I need her to be okay with me, like I don't know who that might be tomorrow. Like I happen to be very married to a very stable person, but even that, she's going to change over time, and so I'm not going to necessarily know who I am. How could I know who I am? Like she's moving, I'm moving. It's all a moving system. The beautiful thing about having God as your higher power is that he actually is God and he doesn't move and he doesn't change. That's straight out of the Psalms. He never changes. Um, and he also is the since in my worldview, he's the creator. He's the one who can actually tell. I get a twofer, I get something that doesn't move, but I also get someone who's willing to tell me who I am.
Right.
Yeah, and then it's a threefer because the name that he calls me is a good name. And I go, oh, so I get to a non-moving target, someone who's willing to tell me who I am, and oh, by the way, I'm guaranteed that it's a good name. That's a game changer because now it's like whenever you're trying to to learn how to swim, it's good to have a side of a pool where you can push off. It's like where's the edges of this thing? Well, when I found God and I invite him into my life and into my story, um, actually I didn't make him my higher power. I just acknowledge that he is the higher power. Now I have the opportunity to say, oh, I am not some other person's object. I don't belong to somebody else. I actually belong to God. And in that, he tells me my name. And then I can start acting like who I am, which takes a long time. This doesn't just happen like, I mean, when the Bible talks about being born again, that's exactly right. You're not like you're not born again as a 40-year-old. You're born again as an infant, and you have to start, well, you have to unlearn a lot of stuff while you're learning the new stuff,
Mm-hmm.
like learning how to say no, like learning that boundaries are okay, like learning that when someone is violating your boundaries constantly and you can say no and stop them, that you're actually loving someone. Like a lot of people don't understand that. Like the narcissist is damaging their own self by continuing in narcissistic behavior because they aren't the center of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And their abuse of you and their continual use of you is damaging to them. It actually won't work for them too. So when you stop it, you say, "No, I'm not going to let you do that anymore." That's the most loving thing you can do. Now, a lot of people don't understand that, and the codependent has to really, really work through the emotions of that because it feels really bad. It feels like, wow, I'm not being loving. Actually, saying no might be the most loving thing you ever did for some people.
I agree with that 100%. And I have learned that the hard way, especially recently. But I've had some really great experiences that have put my ability to step outside of being codependent into practice, which has been amazing. I just did a step study on that this past time, and it was just the eye-opening experience of really understanding the depth of it inside of me and how to try to break free from that was pretty intense, but it was pretty amazing at the same time.
Yeah.
um, so one last question, because we only have 4 minutes left. In regard to forgiveness versus excuses. So during my healing, I learned that forgiveness wasn't about excusing abusers. So, how do you guide clients through biblical forgiveness without enabling some harmful behaviors?
Yeah, well, I wrote a whole book about this that I really believe is a helpful tool called The Little Book of Forgiveness. And in it, here's the thing. You got to understand what we're talking about. Okay, forgiveness is not reconciliation. Forgiveness doesn't mean I have to have the offender in my life because there's some really dangerous situations that you are not intelligent to let a person remain. Forgiveness is actually has nothing to do with anybody but you and God. I mean, this is the biblical concept. And forgiveness isn't forgetting. Forgiveness isn't a feeling. Forgiveness is freedom based on a fact. Now, and this is how this works out in the Christian worldview. Either Jesus died for the sins and all the offenses of the world, or he didn't. If he did, then judicially speaking, every offense, your offense, offenses against you, everything has been paid for by Jesus Christ. Now, this is the value of the Christian worldview that no one else has. This is not any other worldview has this. Therefore, in dealing with Jesus about the thing that was done to me, I can take it to him and I can say, this offense against me by this person, by Sue, Sue did this to me. I'm going to bring this to you, and I want to be free from it because this is really hurting me and it has hurt me. I want to be free. The only way I can get free is to take the offense and give it to Jesus and say, will you please adjudicate this? Will you take care of this? Because I do not want to be the prosecutor. I do not want to be the person who incarcerates her. I do not want to be the person who has to constantly carry this. Will you take it? Jesus will take it because he already did. He said, yep, I'll die for the offenses of the entire world. And then he also gives this guarantee. He says, okay, if you give me this offense, I guarantee you that I will make sure that it gets paid for, one way or the other. Either she'll come into me and I'll give her my blood, or she's going to have to deal with it on her own. And that will not turn out well for her. Therefore, I can walk out of the courtroom free. So forgiveness is about freedom. It isn't about forgetting. It isn't about the other person. And it isn't about having a feeling. Like, because you don't always feel it. But you will not get to the feeling you want of freedom without getting a factual version of that first. You have to get the facts. You have to make a decision, and you have to give that thing away. That's hard, but it's the only way. There is no other way to get free other than to do that.
I agree with you 100%. That was one of the most important parts of doing the step study, was getting to that point of forgiveness, because it wasn't about, just like you said, it's not about them. It's about me. It's about me letting go of all that pain,
Amen.
because as long as I hold on to it, it's going to be there. And if I let it go and give it to him, he takes care of that and he releases you from it. And I'm walking and living proof of that.
Amen. Good. That's good.
So
Yeah.
so we have run out of time, Ron. I really appreciate you. Thank you so, so much for coming on and sharing your insights.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and any closing statement you want to make before we get cut off?
Yeah, I appreciate you, and I'm glad that you're on this journey. And thanks for inviting me on to the show, but thanks more for inviting me into your life.
Oh, absolutely. And I so appreciate you coming into my life. And the way it's happened has just been such a blessing, to be honest. And thank you for your every morning call. That is just a very big blessing for me, because it makes me get out of bed, for one.
Yeah. Well,
And
invite other people.
at Lumerize, we believe everyone is seen, worthy, welcome, and loved.